the BBC School Report 2018 at Christleton High School. I am Beth.
And I'm Joe.
In this year's report, we have stories ranging from eSports and an interview with a famous gamer.
Importance of performing arts and a talk from a Holocaust survivor. But first, here is an interview with Mr. Hall about eSports.
Hi, my name is Tom, and for our school report we decided to research about Twitch and how eSports is streamed on it. Twitch is a platform where people broadcast in which people play games or take part in tournaments to the public. eSports is electronic sports where people compete with other streamers for trophy and money. We are lucky enough to interview multiple streamers.
These people were Nick Bunyan and Onscreen. Nick Bunyan has 233,000 followers on Twitch and 1.16 million subscribers on YouTube. Here's our interview with them. We hope you enjoy.
I'd say more and more people discover it, and they love the straight up honest interaction between the streamer and the viewer. You have to make unique content. You can copy somebody else, but why would you copy somebody that already has a following? Because people are just gonna watch that person. So you wanna create your own unique spin on how you stream, and also you definitely want to get yourself on a schedule, stick to the schedule, and very importantly, interact with the viewers that are watching you. I think both of them are very hard to get started on. I would say that YouTube would have a easier way to get started because you can upload a video and that video is available 24/7 to anybody in the world. But when you stream, you basically have to aim to get an audience for the time that you're live, because nobody goes back and watches offline streams. But at the same time, if you do a good YouTube video that gets passed around, that can be seen any moment. Well, see, that depends on your definition of success, because there are channels like League of Legends competitions, the championships that they do, that basically have zero interactions with the viewers because it's just something that's presented and you watch it as you would watch, I don't know, any game on TV. But then at the same time, you also have channels that are a single person. You have like Shroud, Dr. Disrespect, Summit, Lyric. These guys that are just one person that are fully interacting with the channel. So depending on the content that you stream, it just depends on what you want to kind of success. If you're going for a streamer, it's quality content, skill, comedy, all these things. You have to be at the top of your game. It's something that, for example, for me, it took about 3 years before I got one paycheck that I could look at it and go like, yes, this is something that can sustain me for this month. So it's been like 3 months of getting very, very, very low, like not barely being able to pay just the internet. It was that low. It was just something that I absolutely love doing. I love creating content. I love entertaining people. So I was fortunate enough that I didn't get kicked out of the house and I was able to continue. But you gotta have the hunger for it. If you just go in it for the paycheck, then you're probably not, in the tough times, you're probably gonna get super depressed. But if you're doing it because you actually love it, and that motivates you.
Okay. Are you aware of what Twitch/live streaming is?
Yes, I've actually used Twitch before myself to live stream my own games when I used to be quite competitive gamer, and so I've used it before.
Do you think that there are negatives about live streaming? If so, what are they?
I think that live streaming has really hit the mainstream consciousness over the last few years, and I think that there is a risk that some of the people that are live streaming aren't very good role models for young people.
Do you think eSports is a good opportunity for people to actually gain something from gaming?
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity for you to share, collaborate with other people, and I think that because there is a huge following for a lot of these major eSports, I think it's an opportunity for people to see competitive environment in a positive way.
Do you think that eSports should be in the Olympics at its current stage?
That's a difficult one. There are certainly many things that make it suitable for being included in the Olympics, but there are probably actual sports that probably deserve to be joined in the Olympics before eSports. I think while we keep growing the profile of eSports, I think over the next 4 years or maybe 8 or 12 years, it might be more worth considering.
What do you think about the success of eSports over the past few years?
Well, it's amazing. When I used to do it a few years ago, it was just to a few maybe tens or hundreds of people, but some live streamers now can hit hundreds of thousands. In fact, I was reading this morning that I think it was Drake joined a live stream with someone else, and they hit over 500,000 people all streaming it, all watching the stream at the same time. And it's amazing that it's grown so much over the last few years.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now on to our next story about plastics polluting our environment. Here is an interview with Mrs. Chapman.
Hello and welcome to our talk about plastics and the impact of it in our environment. How does plastic waste affect humans?
Oh, part of that is we don't actually know yet. But what we know so far is that we have a huge amount of plastic waste that's affecting marine life. So things that large animals are being caught up in it. We're also finding that marine birds that used to feed on things that were floating on the ocean, they pick up pieces of plastic, and not only that would kill them, but they go and feed those small bits of plastic to their young, and we find lots of dead chicks where their stomachs are full of plastic. So we really need to think about how much we're throwing into the oceans.
And why has the matter of reducing plastic only risen in the news now, instead of months or years before?
I think it wasn't really visible. So people have been learning about it over the years, and the more they've learned, the more they found out about the effects. So we haven't really understood the consequences of our actions, really. We're just starting to get to the point where we can see so much plastic waste in the oceans and in the environment that it's actually having quite a big impact.
Okay. Why is reducing plastic so important to you?
Well, to me, I care about the environment we live in now. Conservation is really important to me. I want to be able to know that when I'm gone, my children and my children's children will have a pristine environment to live in, and they'll be able to see and experience all the lovely, wonderful organisms that the planet has to offer.
How long do you think it will take, if ever, for the problem to be solved?
That's a really good question. And one that I can't answer yet. What it really comes down to is scientists of this generation really finding out what's happening and putting their minds to coming up with solutions. If you look in the past, we've cleaned up lots of things over time, so I know that it's probably possible to do that, but at the moment there's so much plastic there, we're not sure how to do it. So, believe in technology, be good scientists, and make sure that you work towards that in the next generation.
Thank you.
We'll now be moving on to a story about Coca Cola and its pricing. Here are some Year 7's taste testing.
Today we'll be going live for the Budget Cola Challenge,
where a selection of students will be trying to recognise the real Coca Cola against other supermarkets' interpretations.
Every year, the general public spend $1.6 billion on the beverage, and we want to know, is England's money well spent?
This is cola number 1.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what are your thoughts?
It definitely brings out the flavour of the
Do you think it could be the real one?
No.
I feel it doesn't have
flavour.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
needed.
Okay, let's try number 2.
Does this one taste different or the same? Or
It does taste different.
Yeah, it tastes sweeter.
Sweeter than the real Coca Cola,
Yeah.
do you think?
Yeah.
Okay. So no chance it will be the real one?
Yeah, different interpretation.
Okay.
Okay, try Coca Cola 3. Is it different in a good way, bad way?
This is different in a bad way. Doesn't taste very nice.
No. Doesn't taste very nice?
Yeah.
Too
That's what
sweet, too
struck me in
sour?
this colour.
It's like
a bit bland and disgusting.
Okay.
Number 4. I think that is.
I think it's a
one.
bit too sweet. Yeah, same.
Too sweet?
It tastes like a sweet.
Like a sweet one?
Yeah.
Okay, too sweet.
Okay. Probably not very long. Okay. That's the real one.
The real one? What do you think?
Yeah,
Definitely laughing.
so it's like the right sweetness of the genuine Coca Cola.
So
The
you're going...
flavours there, colour. Yeah.
Or you're deciding on Coca Cola
I think it's 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is, in fact, Cola 2.
Gosh.
Well, do you want to retaste of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. So that is actually priced at over £1, but then the last one is priced at 65p.
Gosh.
And the country are buying and using billions and billions of pounds on a Coca-Cola that might not taste as good as others. So.
Yeah.
Our next story is an interview with Mr. Phillips about the importance of performing arts.
As a child, did you ever think you would become a performing arts teacher, and what impact did it have on your life?
Okay, well, I was very interested in performing arts as a student, your age, but I was mostly interested in the musical side of performing arts, so I learned to play the saxophone at an early age and the clarinet. My experience on the stage was a lot less at your age. It was something that developed for me during sixth form and then at university. Did I ever imagine I would be a teacher? I actually always said that I didn't want to be a teacher. You might be surprised to know. Nevertheless, I ended up doing lots of private tutoring of actors and instrumentalists and so on, which then eventually led me to decide that I would become a teacher. So, you know, it's a nice opportunity for me to share my passion, I suppose, as much as anything else. And I really enjoy the fact that I can combine my interests in music and in stage performance together. So I consider myself to be very lucky, I suppose.
What was the biggest show you've ever put on in recent years at Christleton High School, and why do you think it was so successful?
Okay, well, the scale of our annual productions here at Christleton has definitely grown from the very beginning. But actually, probably the one that I remember with greatest fondness and that was hugely successful was a show that we did a number of years ago, which was We Will Rock You. We've done bigger shows since. Billy Elliot was on a huge scale, so was Joseph recently. But We Will Rock You was the first time we used a big extended stage and hired in a set and really pushed the boat out with costumes and lights. So although it may not have been perhaps the best show we've put on, it was certainly very successful, and it's the one I remember the most fondly. In terms of the most successful, the one that you mentioned, where we sold every single ticket, was Billy Elliot, which was just a few years ago, which I think is a very popular show anyway. And so despite it being even a school production, lots of people came to see it from all over the place. So.
Okay, and final question. How do you recognise star quality in a person, and what are you looking for?
Okay, star quality. Well, star quality can mean something different depending on what you're looking for, you know, in a particular audition. So we obviously hold auditions here, for example, for our shows. And what we're usually looking for is confidence more than anything. rather than perhaps natural ability. It's our job to coach and help students develop their skills and their specific role. So what we're mainly looking for in auditions is somebody who will come in and just give it their absolute best, regardless, and try not to be too inhibited. When I'm auditioning people outside of school, if it's for a specific role rather than generally being part of a cast as it might be at Christleton, then usually I'm just looking for suitability more than anything. If somebody's right for the part, if they've got the right vocal range, and a smile is very important.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure.
Now we will be joined by Lady Milena, a Holocaust survivor, and she'll be telling us her story.
So, what was your life like when you were living in Czechoslovakia?
Probably like a normal little girl, because I was 9 years old when I left. So I went to school. My grandpa used to take me out on a Sunday afternoon because in Prague we had a children's theatre. So occasionally he would take me there. But I remember very little of it actually. But as far as I know, I was a perfectly normal, happy little girl.
If you don't mind us asking, what was it like when you were on the train out of Prague?
That's a question I get a lot. But again, I was 9 and I hardly remember what it was like. What I do seem to remember, because many of us stayed in touch from until now, some of us, we talk about it. And we're not sure whether it's something that we remember or whether another person remembers. It's more like a dream almost. But it wasn't frightening for me. I had my little sister with me who was 3.5. She didn't cry, we know that. And at the time we were told when we were leaving that it's a sort of an adventure, that we would be back soon. We're going on a holiday, we're going to learn English. Different parents told different things to different children. But it was a very vague memory, that's all I can tell you.
What was it like learning English language? Was it hard?
What was it like learning English language? Well, I can't remember not being able to speak English anymore. So that's something. I must have picked it up very quickly. Children do. I do remember going to my first school, because we came to live in a place called Ashton-under-Lyne, and I was sent to a local Mossley Road Council School, it was called. And I still have a report. I wish I'd brought it with me, actually, because in the following year, I've had about 10 out of 10 for English, and 9 out of 10 for poetry, but 12 out of 50 for arithmetic. And that's remained the rest of my life. I can't count. I was terribly bad at arithmetic. And we had to learn to knit and to sew. But I can't remember, I honestly can't remember not being able to speak English anymore. I still speak Czech, but I must have picked it up quite quickly.
How was it when you were reunited with your family after the train?
Well, in my case, it was very different because my father was warned to leave the Prague the day before the Germans marched in, and he was sent to England. And it's like a bit like a detective story, actually. It's quite long, because my father, in the 1930s, was a great admirer of a very famous German author called Thomas Mann. Thomas Mann was living in Switzerland. He'd been expelled by the Germans, and he was stateless. He had no passport. And my father was a councillor in our own little village. And he suggested that the little town made Thomas Mann an honorary citizen. But to do that, you had to have permission from the Czech president. So the president sent my father to Switzerland and offered Thomas Mann a Czech passport and his family. So in 1937, Thomas Mann came and thanked us thanked the village for doing this, and travelled to America with that passport. Well, we moved to Prague, and then in 1939, one day, well, on the 13th of March, 2 men appeared in my father's office and told him that the Germans were going to be occupying the whole country and that he was to leave immediately and destroy all the documents that he had anything about Thomas Mann. And they sent him, of all places, to Berlin, which is the last place anybody would be looking for him. And he was hidden in a safe house. And then the next day, a German officer came to collect him, and my father thought, my goodness, they've caught up with me. But this man actually travelled with him to Cologne, where he put him on a plane, and my father managed to get to England. And then my mother appeared miraculously in 1940. And this is part of the story I'm going to be telling the others. So I was very lucky, and I had my parents in England. But all those other children, and there were 10,000 German and Austrian children that came to England in 1938, and another 688 that came on the Winton trains. Most of those never saw their parents again.
Anyone else? Any questions?
Did you ever realise what was happening?
At that time, no. At the age of 9, I was just told, I knew nothing about the forthcoming war at the time, because although by the time I left, the country was already occupied, they hadn't got to a point where you had to wear the yellow stars, where you weren't allowed to go to school. It was still a fairly normal life for the 2 months that I was there. The crackdowns really came in 1940.
You guys want to ask anything?
One more. How did you feel when the war was over? Was there anything special happening?
Well, in 1945, when the war was over, as I said, my parents were here, and we decided to stay here. And I was by then about 15. And everybody was just keen to, well, in England, to get on. I went and trained as a nanny, as a nursery nurse. I worked as a nursery nurse for 2 years, and I went to France for 2 years as an au pair. And then I came back, and I was living a fairly normal life. But of course, terrible things were happening in Europe, and we discovered that by then that we had no relations left. That my grandparents and my cousins and my aunts and uncles, they'd all died in the gas chambers.
Recently, have you ever wanted to move back to the Czech Republic?
No. Well, I've lived here all my life. I'm married here. And we decided very quickly not to move back because the communists then took over. And for the next 40 years, the communists ruled in the Czech Republic. So we decided to stay in England.
Okay, well, thank you very much for letting the school reporters ask you some questions.
Is that all right?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
Well done, guys. And then Ollie and Tom are in year 9, so they'll actually hear your talk this afternoon as well.
Fine. What's your book?
My English book. I've got a test next lesson.
It's what?
He's got a test next lesson.
Oh, right. Now an interview with Miss Anderson about her sign language.
What inspired you to start learning sign language?
Okay, so I'd always had sort of a fascination with the language, just from seeing it on TV. You see the people in the sort of corner of the screens, BBC News. That sort of carried on until university, and I did have the chance to sort of take a BSL course, but I chickened out because I thought I'd fail it, and I thought I'd fail my degree. And then afterwards, a friend of mine took a BSL course and suggested it to me, and I had a bit of time after university, so I decided to do it. I just carried it on.
What is your favourite sign?
Oh, there are so many. So I think the main one is probably turtle, which is like that. But there are loads of them. So if you want to say you're shocked, you go like this. And it's really funny because it's almost like your chin's falling off. The other one is spring, because I think it's quite an expressive one. And don't care. So it's like, pff. It's quite expressive. If you want to say I don't care about something, pff, I think people will get it even if they don't know sign language.
Do you think fine isn't tall enough?
Yeah, definitely. So if you look at sort of approximate statistics, is that 1 person in every 1,000 is going to be born with some sort of hearing loss. So that might be that they're a little bit deafened, that might be that they've got a profound hearing loss. Of those students, about 80% of them are ending up in mainstream schools, which again, with new advances in technology is absolutely fine. A lot of them will be able to access sort of communication verbally, also using sign if they want to, it's their choice to make. But a lot of them aren't getting the support they need. So if you think about the number of deaf teachers and the number of support staff that we actually have for students to make education accessible, it's actually in decline at the moment. So part of that is making sure that they have everything they need to be educated, but part of it is also making sure that the wider school community is educated about sign language, and that includes you lot.
What is the difference between Makaton and sign language?
So Makaton can be used for people who have hearing impairment, so who are partially deafened, but it's also used for people who have any sort of learning disability, any communication problems, so verbally they're not able to communicate, and it's a system of signs and symbols, and those are usually in the order that you speak. And that's so that as a young child, if you do end up with a profound hear loss, you do need to use sign language. Your written work is going to be the same structure that you or I would use. Sign language is a language that's actually used by the deaf community. It's got its own structure, it's got its own culture, it's got its own history.
What is the best technique for learning sign language?
Definitely in a group. So there are online courses that you can take, but part of learning sign language is being able to sign yourself, but also being able to use your receptive skills, which is looking at what someone else is doing and understanding the signs from them. Obviously, part of that is to do with different regions have different signs. So actually, if you're not learning a part of a community, you're learning a very sort of narrow aspect of BSL.
Do you think it is important for young children to learn sign language, and why?
I definitely think it is important. A, because it's a language that's being used in this country. So I think it's about 50,000 people that actually use BSL as their primary language. If you think about a lot of those families that end up with children that are profoundly deaf, have siblings, have parents. So one of the jobs of my former BSL teacher, she actually went into families where a child had been born deaf and the families were hearing. And they didn't know how to communicate with that child. And part of it is as simple as being able to make eye contact, being able to look at it, being really expressive. And that applies to the parents, but it also applies to siblings. So you might be in a position where actually you are with someone who needs to use BSL to communicate. It's your responsibility as well as theirs to be able to sort of engage in that.
And finally, do you think other countries should have different variations of sign language, such as BSL and ASL?
Definitely. So if you came up with a common language for sign language, it would be the same as saying, right, let's come up with a common spoken language. And if you think about how much of a country's culture, how much of its history is actually wrapped up in its language, it would be like taking that away to say, right, okay, we're going to have one version of sign language for everyone across the whole world. Yeah?
Thank you.
We'll now be joined by Emma Hibbs, an author of great talent.
Did you always want to be a writer? And if not, what did you want to be?
Well, I remember when I was about 7, when I was in primary school, and I wrote my first book when I was about 5, and it was stitched together with cotton, and it was hand illustrated and everything, handwritten. It was really looked quite silly now I think back on it. And I wrote my first novel when I was 12. I actually wrote it here in school, and I always sort of thought this might be something that I want to do, but it wasn't until I actually got the support from my family and my teachers here that I thought that I actually could do it. And on the side, I always wanted to work with animals. So when I went to university, I actually studied animal behaviour, and then I went on and did a master's in wildlife conservation. And that's sort of still what I do now, but I also write, so I'm very lucky that I managed to get both my dreams come true.
Sort of similar, but did you start writing as a career, as a passion, or both?
First of all, it was a passion, it was a hobby, it was something that I did as my downtime after I finished my homework. And then when I realised that I actually could make a career out of it, I kind of thought, well, the great thing is, it is a career, but it's not a job, it's a joy. And the thing that I loved about it the most was it didn't matter the fact that I wasn't doing it as a hobby anymore, that I was doing it professionally, because I still loved it. And that was just such a fantastic feeling.
how old were you when you started sort of reading and getting into like English?
Well, I was reading since I was very young. I actually remember when I was about 8 years old, I read Oliver Twist, and my teachers at the time couldn't actually believe that I read it because it's such a big book. But I can't actually remember when I started reading. I remember when I started writing, but it's just something that I've just naturally done all through my life. So there isn't really any point where I can actually pinpoint that it actually started, but I've never stopped.
Do you think reading is a key part of writing?
Absolutely. There's a quote which I've heard quite a few times, which is, you need to be a reader before you can be a writer. And it's very true, because you can experiment and learn a lot along the way, and that's important. But at the same time, you learn from those who have gone before, and the books, I think, are basically like teachers in school. You learn from them because they've gone before you, and they may highlight things by reading books, even bad books. You can figure out what doesn't work and what you like and don't like, and then you can transfer that into what you want to do as a writer.
Were there any specific teachers from Christleton that like inspired you to write?
Definitely. I don't think a lot of them are here anymore, but ones who were always behind me were a teacher called Mr. Hall, who was in maths, and there was also Mr. Kane from English. Mrs. Harding from geography was a big, she was always supportive of me as well. And my old form tutors, Mrs. Mothersdale, Mrs. Richards, and practically all of the English department.
Who is your literary idol?
I had quite a few, and it's changed as I've got older. But when I was in school, one of my main ones that I really remember looking up to was Christopher Paolini, who wrote Aragon. And the reason why I looked up to him was because he wrote fantasy, which was what I absolutely love to read and write, but also the fact that he got published when he was 15, and at the time when the Aragon movie came out, I was 15. So the idea that someone my age had managed to accomplish all this, it was such a big thing. I thought, well, if they can do it, why can't I? Why shouldn't I? And that's what really made me think, yeah, I'm going to try and get published, and I'm going to try and make an author out of myself.
Do you feel your past or personality has affected like any of your writing?
Definitely. It's something that I've found, it doesn't necessarily happen even the way that I mean it to. It's like I can write a story, and then later on when I'm reading back, I think, oh, okay, I didn't actually realise that such a huge chunk of myself or of my views or anything like that had come out in the story, but it just happens. And the reason why I think it happens is, even if you're writing a character that is completely different to how you are as a person, like a baddie or someone who's really out there, you always have a little part of yourself in the character, because you have to in order to be able to understand them and write about them. So to be able to hark back to the familiar is the key, I think, to actually what makes good writing.
If you could be a character for a day, who would you be?
Because I'm such a fantasy freak, it would probably have to be someone from Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or something like that. So I'd probably be an elf or something. I get told quite a lot that I look a bit elvish, so I'd probably live in Rivendell or something.
Now an interview about poaching.
We're here to interview Mr. Miller today and discuss illegal wildlife trade and poaching. What do you think the most endangered animal is, and why?
Well, there are a number of animals that are in real danger at the moment. There's been a huge increase in the amount of animal poaching and animal trade. The Javan rhino, for example, that's one of the most endangered species, but the tiger's really under threat because of all the medicine in Asian countries. It's seen as a source of medicines. Totally unnecessary, but that's what they use it for.
Which do you think's worse, poaching or the animal trade?
The animal trade probably has the biggest impact. There is certainly a legal animal trade, but the illegal animal trade, where the poachers come in, kill the animals, take what they want to sell it, that's having a massive impact at the moment.
What do people benefit most from poaching animals?
In some countries it might be economic, so it could be that if you see this as an easy way to get income, then that's certainly something. If you want to feed your family, it's an easy way to do it. But a lot of the animal poaching and the trade nowadays is run by huge criminal organisations.
do you think illegal animal trade earns per year?
It's got to be in the billions. It's a huge industry and certainly run by organised crime and feeding into things like even terrorism.
About how many rhinos do you think have been poached between 2008 and 2017?
Wow, what a question. Certainly in Africa, the rhino poaching problem got bigger and bigger. Up until this year, the numbers have fallen slightly. It's still over 1,000 rhinos this year, but the numbers have dropped. So I've got to say somewhere in the region of 10,000 rhinos over that time period.
We found 7,000.
7,000, I'm not at all surprised. At the start, back in the early 2000s, the numbers were quite low, but it's really gone up. And the reason that that's happening is because they genuinely believe in certain markets that powdered rhino horn has a lot of powerful medical effects. It's made of the same stuff as your fingernails. Chewing your fingernails doesn't make you better. So powdered rhino horn really isn't going to do that either.
Do you think poachers will ever stop poaching?
I think while there's money in it, no. But what we can do is we can educate people and we can provide alternatives so that if you want to feed your family and you see this as an easy source of income, if we tighten up the laws in those countries and we tighten up and we provide alternative ways that they can get an income, then we'll start to bring down the number of poachers.
What do you think the poachers will still hunt for a living?
I think that they will always see that there's loopholes and there's places where they can make easy money. And because it's organised crime and it feeds into other things like trafficking slaves, human slavery, because they're making so much money out of the business, they will continue to do so. China has started to ban ivory imports. Britain's looking at doing that next. If we start to do that, if we tackle it on a big scale and we take away the source of income, then we'll take away the reason for doing it.
Next, an interview with Miss Edwards and her experiences with bullying.
What are the most common types of bullying in today's society?
There are so many types of bullying. It is really quite scary actually. So there'd be verbal bullying. There'd be bullying through people writing things down and passing them to you. Physical bullying is another one. People getting into fights, people being hit, people being punched. But I think as a school, probably one of the most concerning types of bullying for us at the minute would be cyberbullying. So people sending messages over Instagram, Facebook and some of the different social media platforms that are available.
How can children be affected by bullying?
Again, the ways that children can be affected by bullying is massive. It can really affect the self-esteem of somebody, and somebody who's started school or started the year feeling really happy and really positive can start to feel really low, really down, maybe think that they're not worth anything and what's happening to them is their own fault. It can affect their relationships with their friends. Maybe they won't want to do things with their friends anymore because they're so scared of what will happen. It can affect relationships with siblings, with parents, and also their ability to focus on the schoolwork and the progress that they're making.
Why do you think bullies bully people?
Again, there's so many different reasons as to why bullies bully people. Sometimes it can be a learnt behaviour. So people may have observed things at home and they think it's okay to carry on doing it. Maybe things that they've seen in the news, gossip or rumours that they've heard. Some people might really sadly do it for a laugh. But I think again, one of the big reasons why people bully is because they have a lack of self-esteem as well. And they feel like they're not understood. And their coping strategy with that is to try and make somebody else feel just as bad as they're feeling.
How could they stop the bullying?
So there are lots of different groups of people and what they can do to stop the bullying. I'd always say speak out, come and tell your teachers, tell your parents if you feel that either you or one of your friends are being bullied. If you don't feel like you can talk to somebody about it, then write it down. But always let us know who it is. As a school, we always have to act and we have to do what's best to protect people. So if you're letting us know who it is, we can make sure the correct intervention is put in place. It's about restorative justice and making sure that the bully is aware of what they're doing and how it's impacted as well.
Here are some facts about bullying. Over 3.2 million students are victims of bullying each year. About 160,000 teens skip school each day because of bullying. 1 in 4 teachers see nothing wrong with bullying and will only intervene 4% of the time. 67% of students think that schools respond poorly to bullying. 1 in 10 students drop out of school because of repeated bullying. There are websites and helplines if you just want to talk about it or get help for it. Here are some that you can visit. There are Childline, ChildNet, Kids Health, and you can even visit BBC Bullying website for help. Thank you for listening.
Here is an interview with Mr. Francis and Miss Chismedare about therapy dogs.
So, Mr. Francis, what role does a therapy/comfort dog play?
Well, here at Christleton High School in Chester, we use therapy dogs, or comfort dogs as we prefer to call them, in 3 main ways. I think the first way is as a reward for some students to take the dog out walking and to spend time with the dog. Second way is as a reading companion, so students who benefit from reading out loud have got somebody to read to who will listen, won't pass judgment on any of their pronunciation or spelling. So that's the second way. And then the third way is really as a kind of calming influence, I think, really, so that somebody who is stressed or is upset about something can spend time with the dog and stroke and just have that kind of calming time.
So what role does a therapy/comfort dog play?
Therapy dogs are excellent if you want your blood pressure reducing. They are notorious for lifting mood. People just generally feel happier around them, and I think that's good for the children in school, particularly when it's exam time or there's particularly stressful times throughout the year. It's lovely to have a dog around. You will see people smile when they see the dog.
Now an interview with Miss Lawson about girls in computing.
Hello and welcome to BBC School News Report. I'm Nicole and this is Ruby. We're here today with Miss Lawson to talk to her about girls in computing.
Why do you think that computing for girls is so important?
I think because, as you know in the news recently, there's been lots of reports about the fact that there's a massive deficit for women in computing at the moment, and girls are just as good programmers as men, and I think it's important that we start to represent women and empower them and make them aware of these roles and career paths that are out there for them, so that we can get more women into these roles which are higher paid and gives them more opportunities for progression in the future.
Do you have any ideas how we should get girls involved in computing?
I think probably like Christleton's doing is that we have to make sure that as a school we're putting on lots of events which make you aware of what the career progressions are. Things that we can be doing in school could be getting guest speakers in, we could have activities to show you what kind of involvement they could have in computing. So for example, having cybersecurity come in, looking at hacking, all of those areas which are obviously male dominated, we want to make sure that we can represent women in there too. So schools have a responsibility to be putting those kind of events on for their pupils.
Why do boys think that they are better at computing than girls?
I think just because there's so many boys involved in it at the moment, so obviously it's a male dominated career path. However, a lot of boys associate staying at home playing on their Xboxes as computing, where in actual fact it comes down to all the other areas involved, so looking at cybersecurity, looking at programming and those areas where women generally are very good at, just as good as men, so they should be involved more.
Why did you choose to teach computing to students, and were you inspired to teach them at one point in your life?
I think it's a bit of an odd one. I really enjoy the teaching element, so it's not perhaps the computing thing. I just have a bit of a passion for computing, so the combination of the two together just seemed to have worked out, and I think it's such an important subject now for students to be following because it's not going anywhere. It's only going to get better. Technology is developing all the time, so we need to make sure that we're educating our students so that when they leave here, they've got the opportunities available to them.
Is there a club to help, like, sort of encourage people to, girls, boys, into computing, like?
So last year we started a club called Coach Dojo, but there wasn't a massive uptake for it. But I have been speaking to Mr. Hall about putting a girls in computing club on, specifically just for girls, to try and encourage them to be more into it. But as I say, we're kind of trying to do a few more activities within school, like the girls in computing events. We've got a hacking workshop coming up in April, which we're hoping to roll out to girls as well. And we're currently working with the police department as they are setting up a cyber crime scene for us. And we're going to take pupils along there to sort of show them, if they were to work into a crime scene, what the first things they're going to do with the technology that's available to them.
So thank you for answering our questions and spending your time with us.
You're more than welcome.
Finally now, an interview about the representation of Barbies and the harmful effects it has on today's society with Mrs. Cowley.
Have you ever owned a Barbie or known anyone who have?
When I was growing up, I didn't have a Barbie, I had a Cindy, which was a cheaper version of Barbies that they had that was just a UK brand. I got them mainly because they were offering free Barbie dresses with vouchers from Weetabix, so that's how I ended up owning one. I also had a Ken that had real hair, and I used to have quite a lot of fun giving Ken some mad hairdos.
So we're going to read you out some of the measurements for a Barbie. So if a Barbie was a size of a real woman, then she would be 5'9". A healthy British woman is 5'3". Her bust is 39 inches. Healthy British woman is 31. Her waist is 18 inches. Healthy British woman, 31 inches. A Barbie, her hips are 33 inches. A healthy British woman is 36 inches. And her shoe size is a 3. And a healthy British woman's shoe size is a 6. So she's very, very improportionate.
Do you think Barbie is a positive role model for young people?
Well, I think because, as you've heard, I didn't really have that much interest in Barbies when I was growing up, and maybe that was because I didn't see myself in a Barbie. I've never been that tall or that thin, and I never will be, and most people won't. So I didn't necessarily identify them, but there were other characters growing up, like, and I know that the people have said the same thing, as like Disney princesses and things like that are also usually very, very, very skinny and very tall and skinny. I think it's one of those things that I think we need to see more variety of role models. If people want to have that kind of role model, you know, sometimes it's just a fantasy rather than something they're looking at realistically. But I think one of the things, particularly for young girls, I think there needs to be a greater variety of role models. So it's quite positive that I know Barbie have recently branched out and had larger Barbies or shorter Barbies or Barbies of different ethnicities.
On the 8th of March 2017, for National Women's Day, Mattel launched the Shero project, which is the She Hero. Do you think this is a step in the right direction, even though the measurements are still very unproportionate?
I think it's good that people are still highlighting the disproportionate measurements. I think anything that sort of celebrates female heroes is quite good because, and particularly, you know, I don't know if people would see someone like Barbie as a hero. I mean, she's really more of like a socialite character. You know, she doesn't seem to have a job. She lives in a mansion and she's got a car and a boyfriend, and that's, you know, her lifestyle. So it's nice to see women like having dolls or toys representing women who've like had great achievements. So I think that's a step in the right direction.
We're Jo and Beth.
Thank you for joining us.
We will hopefully see you next year.